Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. We're grateful for this community of people interested in improving the trustworthiness of healthcare. And we're really excited to talk about ways that you can build trust at your organization today. And we're so happy to have Dr. Prochaska and Donna Cryer here today so that you can hear real stories of the impact of how you can build trust in your organization. With that, I'd like to welcome our panel and provide just a few brief introductions. So Donna Cryer is founder, president, and chief executive officer of the Global Liver Institute, the only patient-driven liver health nonprofit operating across the US, EU, and UK. Mrs. Cryer has channeled her personal experience as a patient with inflammatory bowel disease and a 27-year liver transplant recipient into professional advocacy across a career in law, policy, consulting, public relations, clinical trial recruitment, and nonprofit management. Dr. Micah Prochaska is an assistant professor of medicine at the University of Chicago. He's a clinical investigator and hospitalist clinician. Additionally, Dr. Prochaska is an assistant director of the McLean Center for Clinical and Medical Ethics and Healthcare Delivery Science and Innovation Scholar, both at the University of Chicago. And finally, we have Daniel Wolfson, who many of you know, and he is the ABIM Foundation's Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. He's also been one of the organization's spearheads for advancing the trust agenda. So we're going to talk with Daniel first. We have two great people to talk about their stories and how they used the pathways that we've created at their institutions for trust engagement. So Daniel, do you mind giving us a brief overview of why the foundation is interested in trust and ways that organizations can engage in our work?
So why did we get involved in trust? For multiple reasons. You see the issues of trust every day in the newspaper and in journals. But we think trust is just so core to healthcare. Trust is all about relationships under vulnerable times. And we saw the decrease in trust over time between physicians and patients, between institutions, and so on. We also saw the attack on science, authority, and then a resulting misinformation that made us interested in trust. And we saw through Choosing Wisely what happens when you put out material in communities that have been historically marginalized and how people react to that. So that was some of the reasons why. We also have a sister corporation, the American Board of Internal Medicine, that itself went through a loss of trust 5 years ago and has been regaining that trust and learning along the way about what does build trust. So, so today, just to give you a context, so we've always thought that, you know, talking about trust or talking about overuse with Choosing Wisely, making it concrete is what's important because people grab on to real experiences rather than conceptual natures of trust. And we could go through that, but we wanted also to begin to learn by people who were building trust. So we built these three options that we're going to see two of them today. And that's why I'm trying to introduce this today. One was that we wanted practices, healthcare organizations and other organizations, just to submit what they saw as behaviors, practices, policies that built trust. And if you go to buildingtrust.org, many organizations, health plans, specialty societies, health systems, all submitted practices, what we call trust practices. And that gave us a lot of information, and we began to build some frameworks from that I won't bore you with today. But the two that, so that was one, you could submit a trust practice and please do. We'd love to post that. But we also came up with two others. And we said to people, why don't you develop your own trust practice within your own organization? And that's what Micah is going to talk about. They did a trust practice challenge within University of Chicago. Donna did the third method, which is crowdsourcing with their management team about what builds trust between their organization and the patients they serve. So what is the real end game here? We're trying to make trust an essential operating feature of healthcare organizations. And we want people to test that muscle, that trust muscle, that framework about how do we build stronger relationships between all kinds of people and all kinds of organizations. So using that trust muscle is kind of the beginning of having trust be an essential principle in an organization. We are now, in year 2 of this building trust, and we're learning a lot, and we're building relationships with organizations like the University of Chicago and with Donna's organization. So we would love to talk to people in the room about what they could do to use these 3 options to begin to think about using trust as an effective framework to improving healthcare and improving the relationships of healthcare. So we can, as professionalism was a vehicle to improve performance as an important lever, we think that trust is also in that same camp. So back to you, Kelly. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from these 2 incredible people.
Great. Thanks so much, Daniel. So I provided brief introductions for both of you, Donna and Micah. But do you think you could provide a little bit more information about you, your organization, and particularly how trust factors into your work? Donna, maybe you could start.
I'll be happy to start. So the Global Liver Institute represents the interests of patients with all forms of liver disease, wherever they may reside around the world. And so for us, trust is essential, but trust also needs to travel and it needs to translate. The interests and the journeys of patients with different types of liver diseases in different national health systems could create a challenge for how we prioritize and set our agenda and do our work. And so it's really essential that we have the input from as many patients across as many countries and cultures as possible. We were trying to, and we constantly try to answer the question that I've had well before I founded a patient advocacy organization. But as a patient, I was always wondering, how do you trust a patient advocacy organization? How do you trust it to be patient-centered and to stay patient-centered? And so that was the question that with Daniel's help and the ABIM Foundation team's help, we asked, and not just our management team, but actually the entire organization from interns to C-suite in several countries to see how we could, and I think Daniel made an excellent point, how could we really operationalize being trustworthy? And in our case, we looked at that as demonstrating how we were patient-centered on an ongoing basis.
Great, thanks so much. Micah, can you tell us?
Thank you. So, I think about trust in all the different roles that I have at the university. And, my primary training is as a clinician. So I'm a hospitalist. And for those of you who know what that means, I'm on the sort of inpatient front lines, interacting with patients. So every time we have an inpatient admitted to the hospital, I'm often meeting them for the first time. anyone that's had a family member or been hospitalized themselves recognizes these are like extremely scary, vulnerable moments. And so everything you're doing, implicit and explicitly, is trying to build trust so you can actually care for that patient. We've all, are well aware of the issues with trust surrounding COVID, because it's sort of both, made us aware of some of these issues and exacerbated them. But, thinking about how we get people to accept a vaccine, I've hardly seen any of these sort of mass campaigns work, but I do know that sitting there at the patient's bedside and walking through them with all of their fears, all of their concerns, as like kind of wild and crazy as many of them are, has been the only thing that's been sort of effective for me personally, to see someone say, yes, I will take this vaccine. You heard I'm one of the assistant directors of our clinical and medical ethics center. And so I sit on our ethics board, and many of the ethical issues that rise to the ethics board have some degree, obviously, of ethical problems or moral philosophical reasoning that they need the ethics team to sort of weigh in on. But oftentimes overlaying that are just issues of communication and trust between patients and families, and the doctors, whatever it is. And so, I'm always reminding our ethics fellows, like, yes, we need to get our ethics right, but we also need to help realize that there are other issues such as trust that are preventing us from even sort of talking about the real underlying ethical issues. And, the last thing I'll say is that at the University of Chicago, we're one of the top research institutions in the country, possibly the world. We have lots and lots of resources. We sit on the south side of Chicago. Lake Michigan is a quarter of a mile away, and it's absolutely gorgeous. But our neighborhoods that surround us are historically under-resourced and underserved. And so there's a narrative both amongst our medical center and our university, and some of it is absolutely justified, and sometimes it's not so justified, that we know that we've not been good neighbors. And as a doctor and as a physician, many times people's only experience with the university is our hospital. And so we have this absolute responsibility, not just to the medical center, but to the university, to help people realize, we're here to care for not just us, but actually all of Chicago, and particularly the South Side. And so a lot of that is just building trust.
Great. And could you tell us, Micah, a little bit more about the actual challenge and why you decided to go the trust challenge route?
Yeah, so we were inspired in part by the ABIM Foundation, but we had this really successful Choosing Wisely challenge over a number of years, also inspired by the ABIM Foundation. And, the sort of core of that challenge was that the people on the ground level know what needs to be fixed, and they know how to change culture and make a difference. And so we knew that. We had also actually collected and published some data on trust that was showing that, at least within our institution, the doctors and nurses that were caring for patients were actually highly trusted, but patients really were sort of looking at healthcare in general, saying, well, I don't know about healthcare, but I like my doctor and my nurse that cared for me when I was hospitalized. And so combining those two things, we sort of realized, like, our staff, our doctors, our nurses, like, they know what the issues are. They know how to actually build trust. And if we're going to do this, big events are important, but really to change the culture, we've got to work from the ground up. And so that's how we came up with this Choosing Wisely Trust and Practice Challenge. And it was really a call to our staff, our faculty, to say, present us with innovative ideas to improve the trust and the care that we deliver to the patients here at the University of Chicago.
Great. And Donna, you went for crowdsourcing. So can you tell us a little bit? I think many people may want to know a little bit more about what crowdsourcing means as an event, and why you thought it would be valuable.
Thank you. So we actually did crowdsourcing at two different levels. So first, inviting the entire team across time zone and geographies and titles to really look at every aspect of the organization and how could we demonstrate our trustworthiness to and with particularly our patient audiences. We pride ourselves on being patient-led, certainly, but patient-informed and really having an agenda that is shaped by patients. And so how do we demonstrate that in every way? And the team came up with 12 different ideas. And so for those of you who know me, I came back and said, okay, great. So we're going to do them all and we're going to do them now. And so we have now an ongoing dashboard, it's sort of a trust dashboard of how we can consistently demonstrate in all 12 areas that we identified. And some of those were things that we were already doing about translating things into people's languages. How can you trust a piece of patient education if you can't understand it in your own language? But then there were areas that we could do better, such as we have an advanced advocacy academy, which helps train patients in everything from telling their stories to different types of media to advocating in state and federal policy. And so when it started, it was very much, one patient's slate of things that we thought people should know. I was the patient. As it matured, it was really important to me and to the entire organization that it really reflected what the graduates of the program and that patients more broadly wanted to know, wanted to learn, wanted to be equipped with to make the types of change that they saw needing change, that the points of pain that they experienced in their different patient journeys in their different countries. And so we used several different times during the Advanced Advocacy Academy that we had last year to add a section where we would bring the participants together and ask for their feedback in structured and unstructured ways, in ways that were led by graduates of the program and in ways that were led by staff, although those are rather conflating now since I've promoted one of the graduates of the program to now lead the program, which I think is a fantastic demonstration of trustworthiness back to the patient community, that not only do I say that they have the skills to serve on committees and to shape policy, and whether it's in hospitals or government, but I trust one of them with, frankly, my most beloved part of my legacy and keystone program of the organization. I trust them to lead it. And so I think it's yet another demonstration. And so it's been exciting to see now regular groups of those graduates built into the operations of the organization, not just for the Advanced Advocacy Academy, but on our patient insights and digital engagement, certainly on our policy have grown. And so now there are several groups that are regularly brought back for insights into the agenda setting and the execution of our programs. And so it's sort of crowdsourcing on steroids, if you will, which thanks to prednisone, I have a lot of familiarity with. And it's really excited the staff to know that even if they don't come from a patient background themselves in liver disease, that they have a mechanism to consistently anchor everything that they're doing in the patient experience, and that it's something that we can show both to other patients and patient families, but also to regulators and policymakers and our industry partners of how we developed our ideas and positions, and what we stand on is so much broader than just our own feelings or single experiences. And so I think that creates a virtuous cycle of trust across all of our stakeholders.
Terrific. And I think most people who have tuned into these webinars know that we find it very important to have both the clinical and the patient voice. Mm-hmm. So I just want to invite the whole panel to sort of react, since you did different activities and you do have different viewpoints. If you have any comments on Donna, if you have any comments on Micah's, if you have any comments on Donna's, and Daniel, as our trust expert, anything to add?
Well, I saw a comment coming through on while Micah was talking on how ethics and trust go hand in hand. And I think that's so true. And Micah, if you want to, address how you do tie those together more, I think that would be exciting.
Yeah, when we sort of teach ethics formally, we often will sort of, we'll get into, again, the sort of like historical moral philosophy underpinnings of patient autonomy and the principles that we should act by. But in practice, like it's absolutely, trust is absolutely important to executing those. And so we often find ourselves where we're asking these or we're trying to answer ethical problems for a provider and a patient or their family. And we're sort of like framing it in this context of like, well, what decision do you want? Do you want your patient do you want to be DNR, DNI, or do you not want to be DNR, DNI? Do you want dialysis or do you not want dialysis? Because for us, we say, well, autonomy matters. That's this framework, this context. And what we've not sort of realized is that like the context is actually much bigger. And there's all of these other interpersonal issues at the forefront of which is trust. And so even before you can sort of ask like, well, is autonomy this primary ethical principle? You sort of have to ask yourself like, well, what matters to the patient? How do they view autonomy? How are they going to perceive this question? And all of that requires you to be able to have a conversation with them. So, we would sort of put this in the realm of shared decision making, which I'm sure everybody here is familiar with. But it's a lot easier to say and a lot harder to do. Particularly in the inpatient setting where things move extremely fast and we're used to it moving fast. We're used to seeing a patient come in, we check the labs, we see the vitals, we have a differential diagnosis, and we're ready to present options and move on. But for the patient's family or the patient themselves, I mean, this like is totally foreign. And so if you don't if you don't work on trust immediately, you are going to have big problems, and then the ethical problems surface later down the road, and everybody wonders how do we solve them now.
Those issues that you talk about, and I was just over at the hospital the other day talking with patients, and for me, you're right, it is really fast because I'm trying to, sometimes it's the first time they've ever heard of that they had a liver disease, let alone that they might need a transplant, and how do you select a transplant center? And so these are coming fast. And so a lot of the issues that we identify, through our crowdsourcing, through our patient insights, are really just all of those points are, when were you most confused during the process? When was it hardest for you to make an informed decision? How can you, share in decision making when you don't have any, foundation or groundwork for any of the things that are coming your way? And so a lot of the issues that we work on, we think do increase the trust that patients can have in their health system, because it increases the trust that patients can have in themselves to be full partners in those conversations and decisions. But if we didn't really ask patients, who many of whom have a very different journey and experience than I have had, if we didn't ask them directly and in a lot of different ways, yes, sometimes in groups just by themselves, sometimes by disease state, by country, by age, by time that they've had in the patient journey, are all different ways that we might group patients together to ask them the question, because you might elicit different answers or different comfort zones with answering those questions about how can the health system be improved and how can the Global Liver Institute play a valuable role in helping to make sure that it is easier to go through a healthcare journey with more confidence, with more trust in both yourself and the system. So I'm really excited about the work that we're doing with patients that can hopefully cascade and improve the relationships with hospitalists and with others across the system.
Donna, I tell the residents this all the time. We know we're part of we're on the inside. We all know all the info. We know the language, the how things work, the time when doctors are around. We know it all. But if any of us have been individually a patient or had a family member who's hospitalized, all that goes out the window. You're like beyond irritated that the attending physician only came by for 12 minutes at max at 7:30 in the morning. And now it's 3:30 in the afternoon. You have a new question that's not been answered. You can't understand why the CT scan still has not been read 48 hours after it was done. And so I try to remind them, you know, hey, I don't want anybody to be hospitalized, but it helps to try and remember what it's like to be in the shoes of the patient to help think about these things.
Right. I was explaining to a patient, you know, who did need surgery. I was like, first of all, it's Super Bowl Sunday. I'd met her in the ER, and I was like, it's Super Bowl Sunday, so like that's not happening tonight. Nothing's happening.
Yeah.
Yes, let's you know set our expectations appropriately. So I'm like, you're going to be admitted, and you're not going to be. We're just getting surgeries and things back online from COVID. We just transitioned the levels, so you're not going to be first on the surgical schedule in the morning, and so they're going to need to regroup and evaluate, and so it's likely Tuesday when you're, and so it just helped to knowing that helped to reset their expectations. And so the same circumstances without those set expectations could have resulted, as you're pointing out, in terms of frustration, and frankly that patient was about to just leave. I was like, no, it'll be okay, this will be the process. And so knowing that are patient frustrations and patient issues and could stand as a barrier to care, and looking at things from a patient lens, so that we can explain, when I see a study on trends in chronic liver disease, and physicians talk about patient adherence as one of the main barriers to outcomes. I'm like, well, here are some of the issues that we've worked on directly from patients, and here's our list of all the things that can get into the way of us, adhering to what you think that we agreed to do. So it's been helpful.
Kelly, can I describe our winners? Because I think the two that are hardest to describe in terms of trust fit right into this conversation with Donna. And then I'll end with the third one, which I know is Daniel's favorite and the easiest to understand with trust. But we had 3 winners that we chose. And so we gave, the winners got a year of mentorship, administration support to help institute whatever it is that they proposed into our healthcare system. So the first 2, where I'll describe, the first one was a process for transmitting information from the outpatient doctors or the outpatient setting to the inpatient setting. And so, typically the outpatient doctor might see you in clinic. So, your gastroenterologist, your hepatologist might see you in clinic and say, you know what, Donna, you got to be admitted. So they put an admission order, and that goes out into the stratosphere, and someone over time, maybe in the next hour, maybe in the next 24 hours, finds a bed in our institution. And then they call you and they say, Donna, we want you to go to 5 Northwest. Okay. And then someone lets the what we call the hospitalist on call know, hey, there's a patient, hepatology patient in 5 Northwest. Can you go admit them? And we go in and we say, like, okay, well, I know your name and I kind of see who your doctors are, but why are you here today? So we walk and say, Donna, why are you here today? And as the patient, you're thinking to yourself, what do you mean, why am I here today? My doctor told me to come here. Isn't that information you should know? Now, for us, again, that makes perfect sense, because there's a separation between the outpatient and the inpatient care. But to the patient, all they hear is, you don't even know who I am. And it scares me that you have no idea why I'm here, because if you have no idea why I'm here, how can you care for me? So the first winner really was improving the process for communication and codifying that process so that the outpatient doctors could communicate with the inpatient doctors, so that we walk in and we say, hey, Donna, we talked to Dr. So-and-so, your outpatient doctor, here was their plan and their suggestions. I'm going to put that into place. We're going to work with them. And that way, just right off the bat, we don't look like we have no idea what's going on.
Absolutely. That is a winner. Let me just tell you that, having experienced that multiple times, that's a winner.
Yeah, so the second winner was improving our advanced care planning, but really just documentation of who you want to make wishes or make decisions for you if you're unable to make them for themselves. So, I've referenced my role in the ethics department here, but often you don't expect for someone to be making a decision for you. Or even if you do, like, you just haven't thought about it, it's not part of your daily thought. And so there's been, eons of papers about advanced healthcare planning, but and there's challenges to stating your wishes and not. But one of the things that we wanted to do was we didn't want this situation where a loved one comes in sick, it's 1:30 in the morning, and we're like, hey, how are you? Who are you? Are there any other decision makers? And do you want to start dialysis? And would you like your family member intubated and resuscitated? Now, we might not be able to answer all of the questions about specifics of dialysis and intubation and resuscitation, but we wanted to at least know that who the patient perceives to be important in making decisions for them, so that we can identify that person early on and say, hey, we understand this is your mom. We also understand you have 2 sisters. Are you all going to be around? Are your sisters here? We're going to have some important questions to ask you and some important discussions. She said that she wants all 3 of you involved in these decisions. And so how can we group together as a family and as a healthcare team later this morning, or whatever it is? So helping identify who the patient actually wants to make decisions. And again, you'd think, to the outsider, you think, well, isn't that obvious and easy? Well, and that's partly why we have some of these issues with trust, is that the healthcare system, we don't do some of these very obvious, simple things. Our third one was something that we didn't come up with and create, although one of the proposals said we'd like to bring this here to the University of Chicago, and that's the pause. And that was after a cardiac arrest. The leader of the code team on the inpatient side asks everybody to pause, to respect the patient and their body and their life, and actually invite the family in, if the family's there, to participate in the pause, and to hold that silence for as long as they feel is appropriate. So those were our 3 winners. And I think the third one is actually very obvious how it relates to trust. The first 2 are harder, and if you don't quite know how a hospital works or a healthcare system works, but we think all 3 of them are really ground level ideas for improving trust.
On the pause, the word that came to mind first for me was actually respect. That it shows respect for the family and respect for the humanity of the person, not just the patient, but the person, and that they meant so much more to other people, and they're not just sort of, the bed A1. And so I think that's really important. And particularly when we talk about, trust across cultures that may not have had, or communities that may not have had great experiences with healthcare systems, with a hospital in the past. That simple pause can really be transformational to a relationship and the perception and perspective, not just of that family, but every family that they talk to back at church or school, about what their experience was like. Even if there wasn't, quote unquote, a good outcome, the respect demonstrated and the trust generated really could have incredible ripple effects.
Yeah, and I think I told you guys this before. There's just no way to prepare for the shock of a code, especially because for people who have not seen it, your vision is like, the old show ER or whatever it is, or the comedy Scrubs, and like that's just so divorced from reality. And so patients are not, or their families are not only like in a state of shock that their family member's sick. Having watched this, they think to themselves, what in the world? And so it's just so callous to sort of wash our hands and, okay, moving on to the next thing. And I just cannot imagine how difficult that would be for a family. But I think the other very interesting thing is many of our trainees, and I say this as someone who, they're mid-20s to mid-30s, and they're often, at least at our institution, the ones responsible for running these codes. And they're developing as clinicians, and they're developing their own sense of maturity and their own sense of how to practice. So that situation, a code, can actually result in a range of responses to our clinicians, And so some people say, well, moving on because it's self-preservation. So I think the code leader calling the team back not only benefits trust in the patient's family and respect, but it helps the team actually decompress, maybe not debrief right there in front of everyone, but helps them recognize this is important. This was a moment that means something. And I think that will help teach, our younger trainees how to do this. And so that when they're older and they're the ones responsible, they're the ones sort of saying like, hey, this is important. It's a form of respect, trust, and improve the care that we're able to give.
Great conversation. Before I go on to a few more of my questions, I want to invite Tara Montgomery. I think your question fits into the conversation that's happening right now, so I don't want to move on until it gets answered.
Thank you both. This is amazing. Micah, I think my question, which I put in the chat, you've partly answered by making me reflect on how people's trustworthiness as individuals is very tied to specific systems, moments, processes. But my question is about the individual and how most clinicians believe that they're trustworthy, ethical people, and perhaps sort of in the abstract they are, but how do they feel when you raise with them that they need to reflect on their own trustworthiness and whether they really deserve that? Do people accept that they might be part of the problem sometimes?
Oh man, kind of a tough question. I hope that at least with our trainees, and I think probably this is the case, I hope with most of them that they're listening and they just say to themselves, oh, interesting, this is a different way of thinking about it. And, I think with the ethics fellows who are often like interacting between this issue with the patient and the team, I often try to say to them, like, it's really honestly about more than the underlying ethical issues. And you've got to help walk the team to that river to drink from the same river that the patient's drinking from. And so that's going to require like phone calls and things that aren't ethical. I hope that augments what they're getting. So for our residents, I hope it augments what they're getting clinically, and for our ethics fellows, I hope it augments what they're getting in their ethics training to see things from the patient's perspective. I don't know if it works. I don't know. We haven't collected data, but I can tell you that the number of people that submitted to this trust challenge shows me that providers are also sort of saying something's not right here. And we need to fix it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they're able to separate who they think they are and what their behavior feels like to a patient. Thank you. And Donna, did you want to say something?
I wanted to add that there is a wonderful book called The Speed of Trust. And so I like to have things that appeal to, different learning styles, and even people who have, different incentives and reasons for doing something. So even if a practitioner isn't perhaps interested in doing it because it's the right thing to do, it will make your job easier. It will make things will go faster if you take the time to establish trust, to explain something to a patient, or to set the expectation, or to ask the patient, what experience do they have, or what solution do they think, or what have they done in the past. It actually makes their job easier and faster and more efficient. So that might not be the ethics professor answer, but as a lawyer who's trained in ethics and rhetoric and has some Marcus Aurelius here on the bottom shelf of the bookshelf, I do have a firm foundation in that. But if that doesn't work, there are other reasons of why taking the time to establish trust actually saves time.
That's a great point. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thanks so much, Tara. And again, I invite anybody to put their questions into the chat, and we may call on you to answer them, or I'll read them if you prefer not to. But before we go on to our next question, I want to just pause, because we are going to talk a little bit more about the activities themselves. And Daniel, do you mind just talking a little bit more about how we can help people with crowdsourcing?
So I just wanted to explain, what do we mean by crowdsourcing? it really is kind of having a question before a management group or a clinical team and asking the question. What is the question? The question is, how do we serve our patients better? We've done work with Wayne State and asked the question in separate groups, how can faculty and residents build trust between each other? At ABIM, at the specialty boards, we asked the specialty boards is, how can we serve diplomats better? So it's all contextual. So you brainstorm the ideas and then you vote. We call it nominal voting. You get 3 votes and usually the top choices rise to the top. So that's kind of the technique, and it's really dependent on the setting. But within an hour and 15 minutes or less, an hour, you can generate a lot of ideas to build trust.
Mhm.
And it is amazing. We've done this now, over a dozen times, well, much more than that, actually, probably more than 15 times. Every time, people are really surprised about what they come up with. And so I'm going to ask Micah a question, if you don't mind, Kelly. Give us some nuts and bolts of your challenge. How did you even describe what you were looking for in trust, and tell us the response, but give us some nuts and bolts of the challenge, if you will, and how you organized it, who judged it. Maybe somebody out in the crowd here wants to replicate it. So give us just a sketch on that.
It was shockingly a very small paragraph describing, that we were calling up for proposals for trust, and we left it actually open. We did give some priority areas like advanced care planning, communication. I have to admit, I haven't looked at the actual proposal in 6 months or so. So we listed a few priority areas, but we didn't restrict it to those areas. We said, these are areas that are institutional priorities. And so I think probably most people would have guessed those anyways, but help people focus if they felt like it was too wide open. But really just a single paragraph on why we thought it was important, why we thought it should come from the ground up, and why we were doing it, and adding it to our Choosing Wisely challenge. We put a word limit on, which I think was like, I want to say it was like only 300 words or something, maybe 500. It was actually fairly short, and just a description of what the proposal was, whether they thought they could complete it in a year, and what resources they needed for it. I'm a former Choosing Wisely winner several years ago. So, you sort of say, I want more words to be able to describe this because I have such a great idea, but that limitation, I think, helps people really sort of focus on what exactly it is that they're interested in. We then had a committee. We just had a committee of about 12 people, and we reviewed them all, scored them all.
How many submissions did you get?
I want to say we got somewhere like 20 some submissions. So, and then, which actually is frankly pretty good for an era where everybody's only allowed to work and think about COVID. So we were actually happy to get these submissions. And then we just debated them and talked about them. And a few of them were so close, we really wanted them to be winners, but we sort of chose these 3 and let the people know, reapply next year. Dr. Euler is placed our trust challenge in the chat, so you can click on it to see the exact language. Thank you, Dr. Euler.
I was, Micah, just to comment on the examples, but I always think, communication is at the heart of trust, and your examples were about that. And just, you know me and you know my situation were really apparent in your examples. And then the last example about pause was just basic respect for humanity.
Yeah.
And so thank you very much.
Of course.
So we've talked a lot about your activities, and I know that in our prep meeting, we got to hear some great stories about what was heard afterwards and feedback and some poignant moments from it. So maybe Donna, if you don't mind starting, we'd love to hear a little bit more about something that tells the story of the impact of the work you did.
Well, I think the impacts are on all parties that were involved. And so again, even in referencing the former question, for a patient advocacy organization to challenge itself to demonstrate patient centricity, being patient centered, I think is new. I think just as physicians like to assume they're trustworthy, patient advocacy organizations want to assume we're on the side of the patients, we're trustworthy, and so my challenge to them as a patient to demonstrate that through this now consistent crowdsourcing activity that we do, that allows for the patient voice. I think for some of the staff coming in, perhaps from other patient organizations and other parts of healthcare and some non-healthcare, the patient voice is a theoretical concept, or it's a very, sort of, pat on the head, nice to have thing. And once you have your voice, then we can go about and do whatever it is that we were going to do. But for me to make sure that all the staff, whether they came from a lived patient experience or on behalf of themselves or their family, that the voice is just the start, then we need to act on it, that it creates our priorities. And that's why, this process was so wonderful, because not only did it generate ideas, but it helped to prioritize them. So how important are these ideas, and how feasible are they for us as an organization to do, and at what time frame? It also, since we are a relatively young organization, only 7 years, and we have, developed our councils in liver cancer, in fatty liver disease, and NASH, and now in pediatric and rare liver diseases, sequentially as we've grown. It also helps us recognize and that there are unmet needs. Of course there are, with 500 million people around the world already living with some sort of liver disease. There are many unmet needs, but being able to create a dialogue with patient communities with different types of liver disease, so that they understand our thought process and can set their expectations of us, and also find better ways to partner with us in meaningful ways and to help us grow. That was sort of an unexpected part of the experience, that it helped us, message even to patient communities that we didn't yet serve, but would like to. And now there's really much more of a bilateral discussion as they help us grow to be able to serve them. And so I think that, for me at least, was one of the most unexpected outcomes of creating a dedicated and ongoing process for crowdsourcing, for asking for these ideas, and then reflecting them back in our actions.
Donna, I yesterday I was on a 4-hour call to update what will be a national guidelines, and I won't tell you what guidelines they are, because they're all of the physicians on this call extremely smart, good, kind people. But one of the priorities was to make our guidelines patient-centered. That was like the very first sentence: data-driven, evidence-based, patient-centered, high quality. And you go through the 45 pages, and there's not a single patient-centered thing in there. And to me, it actually just represents, as you just said, it's like this theoretical thing that we know matters. We're not even sure what it actually is and how to do it and how to make it meaningful. So as you were describing that, I was thinking about this experience yesterday. And, so the guidelines are months from going out, but one of the issues is like, okay, if we're going to say that we want to be patient-centered, we better be actually patient-centered.
Right. And so one of the ways to do that is to have a patient on the guidelines committee, and one as one of the very early people involved as a patient involved in a guidelines committee, and now having been involved in several and training other patients, I understand what a paradigm shift it is. And so, but I think there really is no other way. I know that, there are some, mechanisms. Well, after they're all done, we'll have patients look at them and comment them on. But it's the conversations that you all have, weighing the evidence, and what evidence, should we ask for, should we look for, from which journals, from which sources. It's that conversation between the guidelines members where they really gel. And so to do that afterwards is really just insufficient. A great patient advocate that I respect had this fantastic definition that it's not patient engagement unless something changes. And so unless something is very fundamentally different about your process for creating the guidelines, they can't possibly be patient-centered.
Yep.
Cognizant that we're getting to the close to the end of the time, I want to give Janice the opportunity to ask the panel a question. I see your hand up, Janice.
It's not quite a question, but it's on person-centered or patient-centered guidelines. And I've served on guidelines for, I guess, I'm not going to say who either, but a prestigious organization for 5 years of all physicians. And there's 2 of us public members, and we have a public panel. The public panel consists of individuals from around the United States, and we provide input from sitting on the panel itself. I've actually brought forward a disease state that was brought through, went to ARC, and now their guidelines are out, as well as the society put the guidelines out, so we can make a difference. And then other institutions have asked me to participate, right? But they don't have funding, and I've just been behind the scenes, and I maybe have an hour call with somebody, and I don't even know where that, it's a very important society actually, and I don't even know where it is, right? And that society opened up another opportunity to have patients on measurement. So I wrote to them and said, hey, this is the same subject. Do you mind that I'm putting my name forward, because I was on the guidelines, but I don't, I was just an informer, and they wanted somebody else. And she actually told her it was a global guideline. They said, we can't get anybody else that'll do it for no money. But I was, the subject was important to me. And just today too, I got asked to present at a conference, and they'll pay for me to go, thank goodness. And I'll be speaking. But and it's a very important organization again, or association, and there wasn't consumer funds. So I said, normally at the very bare minimum it should be this amount, and it's not just about me, it's about who comes behind me, right? Because I won't refer anybody in unless they do get some compensation, because it's a bigger issue that we don't have individuals from diverse communities in there, and we can't expect them to be in there without some just compensation, and they need training and mentorship. And I would love to, Donna, talk to you sometime. I would love to start some mentoring in evidence area of mentoring people, because it's a different ball game, right? But it's so important to the clinicians. I'm sorry for going on.
No, that was fantastic. And that's exactly why we created the Advanced Advocacy Academy, to make sure that there were patients who were equipped to serve on these different levels of committees, and that their different professional expertise were matched with their passion and interest, because there are method experts who happen to have a transplant or a certain disease who could be matched with a particular opportunity. And we do move forward and work with each patient on matching them to opportunities. And some are reviewing DoD grants, some are FDA advisory committee members, as I was. But that's really important. And the issue of compensation and there being no funds for the patient. So if there are no funds for that activity, that means you are not serious about it. It's just that clear. And I mean, I thought that was like what we were doing a decade ago, and I'd already laid that dragon. But the National Health Council has done a really fantastic collaborative exercise, and now has available on their website fair market value for patients and patient advocates. So the issue of should we be compensated for adding our expertise to these processes like everybody else is, whether they're through their jobs or otherwise, it should not be the question. And the question of how much, I think of it, in the same way they're figuring out different ways of compensating, the chair of gastroenterology at Mount Sinai University Chicago or whatever, differently from someone, from a medical student. They can figure out how to compensate the CEO of a patient advocacy organization who's worked in these areas and has this expertise differently from somebody who's a newly diagnosed patient and you want them for a certain number of hours. It's not actually hard. So we've done the work to make sure that it could be done. It should be done for just the reasons that you said, because while there are some of us who could volunteer to do this, and I know it's the patient instinct to want to just do it to make it better for other patients, it doesn't actually help ensure that there are opportunities for other patients who can't afford to take the time off from their jobs or just to volunteer to do it, or to travel, or to do it to the extent that their expertise would otherwise allow them. And so, thank you for your contributions, and I'd love to talk with you.
And I'm happy to connect you too after this.
Okay, great.
I think we're connected, but I think we're on LinkedIn and Twitter. I don't know where to come.
Okay, I'm easy to find.
Yeah.
With 2 hours, two minutes to the hour, I want to invite just any final questions or comments. Any final closing comments from the panel?
I'm just so grateful that there are folks like Professor Micah who are asking the questions and challenging his students and the system to do better. I really do think it is the core of ethics in healthcare to build trust with the people that we're supposed to be serving. And so I'll use my final moments just to thank Micah.
Well, I have a lot of different things. I start off describing all these different things that I do at this institution, but honestly, the most meaningful thing is taking care of patients. And, so to me, like actually having, patients like you, Donna, and seeing the difference that I can make with patients is by far the most important thing. It's the thing that gets me up. It's the thing when my kids ask me, what do I do? Or what'd you do today, Dad? It's the thing that I tell them about. I don't tell them about they don't care about a paper being published, like at all. So, I feel actually the same way. And, I'll just end with, I reached out before to our winners to say any updates. I'm going to be on this webinar, and the pause winner, the other two are still actually a much bigger operational lifts than the pause. But the pause said, we've just started. We've had some issues with the fact that we had COVID visitor restrictions, but we pulled a phone in, called the family, had to break bad news that their loved one had died, and we pulled the phone in and we just held the phone there in silence. We then hung up, and we weren't sure if we just thought that was it. Okay, moving on. We did it. We did our first one, and she said she got a letter later from the family saying how appreciative they were of this and how much it meant to them. So I think for us, you never quite know how these things are going to turn out. We know that this is not a short road; it's a long road. But hearing that, I think, helps us, realize that maybe we're on the right pathway here.